Hello, my name is Simran Virk, and this is my persuasive speech on the effects that birth control can have on attitudes and beliefs. The Earth has existed for billions of years. The time that living things have existed is extremely short when compared to this time frame, and the human era is even relatively smaller. However, ever since the first living cell emerged, the main prerogative for survival has always been replication and reproduction to propagate their genetic material into subsequent generations and therefore indirectly achieve genetic immortality. Dawkins 2022. The need to reproduce is therefore one of the strongest basal instincts that an animal can have, up there with self-preservation and feeding. In light of this, human beings have been largely successful in suspending their powerful instincts through the use of birth control. Unlike other animals, humans are conscious of themselves, their needs, and the future, which allows them to delay gratification in the present for greater fulfillment. Dawkins 2022. This ability to plan is the only way to delay reproduction through preemptive birth control. However, not all societies are successful in contraception, nor is the utilization and its distribution. This fact suggests that its pervasiveness and prevalence is mediated by various factors across societies. One of the most widely considered and accepted influences of the utilization of birth control is the availability. Most argue that it is not the most crucial determination of the prevalence of the practice. Herbley, 1941. However, in this speech, I will inform you that it posits that societal views and attitudes on birth control has considerable in effect on utilization of contraception as much as the access to the various means of birth control. The first evidence of this is the correlation between the preventative influence of birth control, acceptance, and religion. Religion comes with strict rules governing the relations between men and women, even going as far as regulating their behavior in the sexual realm. During Ireland's post-colonial era, after 1922, the country's population was overwhelmingly religious, which informed their beliefs and governed their social relations. Gervine, 2017. Therefore, it came as no surprise as the population supported the imposition of a moral order across the countries informed by teaching of the Catholic Church. The religious beliefs and attitudes clearly influenced its successful implementation, with divorce being outlawed and birth control by contraception being prohibited. Gervin, 2017. These orders stood for most of the 20th century and were only challenged with a change in the country's religion. The rise is lifeless opposition in the country's political arena in the 1970s was accompanied by a shift in attitudes towards birth control. Gervin, 2017. The legalization of contraception became one of the main points of contention between liberals and conservatives. These lead to not only a revolution in the Catholic Church's authority as arbitrators of what is right and virtuous, but also upset the long enhanced Irish moral values in regard to contraception. Gervine, 2017. In this scenario, attitudes can be viewed as significant in two significant ways. It is the Catholic beliefs that lead to illegalization of forms of contraception, denying most people access to them in similarity. It was a shift in them that led to the acceptance of contraception and its utilization of society. Gervine, 2017. Secondly, moral beliefs still affected its utilization. Even birth control, partly influenced by the Catholic Church's assertion that it was a sin. Gervine, 2017. Can you imagine it being a sin to not use birth control when you would absolutely need it, like we do in today's society? The influence of religion on the prevalence of birth control is an indication that beliefs and attitude are central to adoption. Female emancipation tracks well with contraception adoption across time. This emancipation came with variable levels of independence and decision-making and pivot from traditional beliefs and femininity, causing women to opt for contraception. Herbley, 1941. McCann, 2020. details the political climate around the adoption of birth control measures in the US in the mid 20th century. The prevailing social attitudes in the period were mostly negative, which hampered progress in adoption and influenced women's decisions making. McCann, 2020. This state of affairs was changed by the women's movement, whose main impact was to opposition conservative political stance and its challenge to the negative connotations associated with birth control. McCann, 2020. This elevation of social stigma freed women to practice birth control. The phenomenon above is further supported by Shorter, 1973. His work explores and seeks to explain the characteristics, rise and fall in fertility rates in two earlier centuries, the 18th and the 19th century in Europe. He postulates that fertility coincides with the adoption of traditional forms of contraception in the young women's demographic. Shorter, 1973. His work demonstrates that the attitude of women's roles in the family setup changed during this period, laying the foundation for women's emancipation in the 20th century. Shorter, 1973. The move from women's accepting survivance to clamoring for independence drives women's use of contraception. With it, they can organize their lives the way they deem fit. Bearing children usually requires a sacrifice of time and resources to cater for their needs for a large part of their lives, 18 years on average. Herbley, 1941. Having an attitude and mindset that prioritizes others' objectives in life other than family, like having a successful career, predictably increases the utilization of birth control among women. Herbley, 1941. Female emancipation opened up alternative routes for women to live their lives other than family and children, which precipitated a change in attitude and ultimately increased the prevalence of birth control utilization. The disparity between the societal perspectives on contraception between men and women, and perhaps the most telling factor on how attitudes and beliefs can primarily affect birth control adoption. Pheno, 2011. Research by Pheno, 2011, indicates that since society stereotypically expects women to shoulder the majority of the responsibility regarding contraception, it results in men neglecting their role in it. They become reluctant when talking about contraception with their sexual partners. They're rarely involved in the decision-making process of determining which type of birth control the women will utilize, and that's not okay. In this vein, traditional attitudes have relegated birth control to the sole responsibility of women instead of the two parties in the relationship. Eberhard, 2009. This fact has contributed to the development of a variety of options aimed at women, relegating men to a few options like condoms, natural methods, and vasectomies for family planning. Additionally, women are generally more affected by contraceptive failure than men, having consequences like pregnancy and disproportionate responsibility for caring for the child after birth. The contextualizes the disparity in gender attitudes and the adoption of birth control. For instance, research findings suggest that even if male hormonal contraception was made accessible, men would still not willingly take responsibility and accountability for controlling fertility, and even more damning. It indicates that they could not be trusted in doing so consistently. Eberhard, 2009. Such findings inform most research industries and policymakers' opinions that resources that are allocated into research and development of new contraceptive options for men and mostly wasted, and would alternatively be better utilized if they were dedicated to increasing access to the available male methods of birth control. Ebert, 2009. The difference in consequences shape attitudes, which in turn influence adoption. Moreover, research has indicated the men in heterosexual relationships only utilize birth control about 1/3 of the time. Ebert, 2009. Sociologists have repeatedly found a contradiction in the role of men in birth control where men hold the belief that the responsibility ought to be shared, but contrastingly, they prefer not to be utilized it. Eberhard, 2009. In the social context, men are widely regarded as unable to regulate fertility, which increases their probability of rejection and responsibility of its utilization when subjected to such a line of questioning. Researchers postulate that the state largely emanates from the ingrained nature of male masculinity. Eberhard, 2009. It overdisplays a fertility rather than a portrayal of its inhibition. The traditional masculine role is further exacerbated by limiting attitudes held by men towards being careful and overly concerned about their well-being, since it would indicate weakness. Eberhard, 2009. Research by Masters, 2017, determined the self-efficiency, cultural norms, and nature of attitudes were reliably correlated to men's openness to discussing contraception with their partners, accounting for 34% variance in their data. She finds a rise in endorsement of traditional masculinity positively tracked with a reluctance to discuss contraception with an equivalent coefficient of negative 0.2. Masters, 2016. This evidence of the effect of gender pervasiveness on contraception and the related disparity in contraception is proof positive of the thesis. The prevailing social connotation and beliefs associated with contraception can affect contraception choice. It is partly responsible for the discrepancy between contraception adoption by women of varying status and educational attainment. Kiraglan and Saraglu, 2020. As they achieve more and their social group changes, attitudes towards contraception evolve simultaneously in the various groups, resulting in change in the adoption of birth control. Kiraglan and Saraglu, 2020. Marston, 2017, find that clashing social demands that impact their identity and standing in a social group influence their choice of contraception and the navigation of birth control as they regulate fertility. Her research indicates that in society with low educational attainment, on average compounded by judgment members, women opt for secrecy in fertility regulations and as such choose to tolerate riskier modes of contraception. Marston, 2017. These findings further support this speech. The above that I just spoke about explains the pivotal nature of attitudes and beliefs on birth control adoption. It has explored the mitigating effects of religion and the moral impositions that accompany it, the influence of female emancipation and the right to self-determination, and the consequent shift in birth control utilization, the various and gender attitudes on contraception, and lastly, the effect of image maintenance on its contraception adoption. Humans are natively social creatures, and their behavior is mediated by prevailing social attitudes or the culturalized adoption of birth control, and is no different. As I wrap up this speech, just to recap, we spoke about the effects that it can have, that birth control can have on women, along with men as well. These are all unhealthy, and women should get to choose what they would like and be pro-choice. Thank you so much.